Around 2004 BC, the ancient city of Ekur, one of the most powerful centers of civilization in Mesopotamia, experienced a catastrophic collapse that would reverberate through human history for millennia. The archaeological evidence from this pivotal moment reveals far more than a simple military defeat or political transition. The destruction of Ur represents a carefully documented endpoint to what Sumerian texts describe as direct divine governance of human civilization, a transformation so profound that it fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with the beings the Mesopotamians called the Anunnaki. The evidence for this transition appears in multiple independent sources with remarkable consistency. Clay tablets recovered from the ruins of Ur's ziggurat complex describe not merely the fall of a city, but what the texts term the Great Withdrawal, a deliberate departure of divine administrators who had governed Mesopotamia for thousands of years. Unlike typical ancient accounts of divine abandonment, these Sumerian records provide specific dates, detailed descriptions of departure procedures, and explicit reasons for the withdrawal that align with archaeological evidence in ways that challenge conventional interpretations of Bronze Age collapse. What makes the fall of Ur particularly significant is the precision with which it was documented and the physical evidence that supports these textual accounts. Excavations conducted by Sir Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934 uncovered layers of destruction that correspond exactly with the chronology preserved in cuneiform tablets. More intriguingly, the archaeological record shows not chaotic devastation, but systematic preparation and controlled abandonment that suggests the city's destruction was anticipated and managed according to predetermined protocols. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur, a literary composition preserved on multiple tablets from various sites, provides unprecedented detail about the events surrounding the city's collapse. This text describes divine councils making calculated decisions about Ur's fate, the removal of sacred objects and knowledge repositories, and the establishment of systems for preserving essential information through the coming Dark Age. The level of administrative detail in these accounts suggests they were based on actual bureaucratic records rather than later mythological elaboration. The Nippur Temple archives contain a remarkable series of tablets dating to the final decades of Ur's dominance that document preparations for what they term the completion of the appointed service. Tablet CBS 10,673, housed in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, describes administrative meetings held at Ur's Ekur temple complex, where decisions were made regarding the systematic transfer of authority from divine to human administrators. The document, written in classical Sumerian script with mathematical notations employing the base 60 system, provides unprecedented detail about bureaucratic procedures that conventional archaeology interprets as routine temple business, but which reveal upon closer examination a sophisticated transition protocol designed to maintain governmental continuity through a fundamental change in leadership structure. The tablet begins with standard administrative headers identifying the date according to the regnal year of King Ibisin, the last ruler of the Ur III dynasty, specifically the fourth year of his reign, corresponding to approximately 2024 BC. However, the content that follows diverges sharply from typical economic or ritual documentation. The text describes a council session attended by what it terms the Great Assembly of Decision, listing 7 primary participants identified by names that appear throughout Mesopotamian literature as Anunnaki administrators. The precision with which this meeting is documented, including the exact hour determined by water clock measurement and the specific chamber within the ziggurat complex where it occurred, suggests this was not mythological narrative, but actual administrative record-keeping. The minutes of this council session, preserved across 3 columns of dense cuneiform text, outline a systematic plan for transferring operational authority over Mesopotamian civilization from divine to human management. The document identifies specific administrative domains including agricultural oversight, water management, temple maintenance, astronomical observation, and record preservation, assigning human officials to assume responsibility for each area. Most significantly, the tablet describes a timeline for this transition spanning 20 years, with detailed milestones marking the progressive reduction of direct divine involvement in daily governmental operations. The final milestone, dated to what would be 2004 BC, corresponds exactly with the archaeological evidence for Ur's destruction. Administrative tablets recovered from the same archive deposit at Nippur provide corroborating evidence for this transition program. Tablet N 3412 describes the establishment of training programs for human administrators who would assume divine responsibilities, including curricula covering advanced mathematics, astronomical calculation, hydraulic engineering, and what the text terms the sacred procedures of governance. The detail provided about these educational programs far exceeds typical scribal training, incorporating knowledge domains that required understanding of complex technical principles. Students were taught to calculate planetary positions using mathematical methods that modern analysis recognizes as sophisticated iterative approximation techniques, to design irrigation systems using principles of fluid dynamics, and to maintain astronomical observation equipment that the texts describe with technical specifications, matching discoveries of advanced instrumentation at ziggurat sites. The transition protocols extended beyond administrative knowledge transfer to include systematic documentation of divine decision-making processes that would guide human governance after the withdrawal. Tablet CBS 19847 preserves what it calls the Patterns of Just Rule, a comprehensive manual describing how divine administrators had managed Mesopotamian civilization for thousands of years. This document provides specific case studies of past administrative challenges and their resolutions, offering human successors a reference library of precedents to guide future decision-making. The sophistication of the governance principles outlined in this text demonstrates understanding of economic theory, social psychology, and systems management that conventional analysis considers far beyond ancient capabilities. Archaeological evidence from excavations at Ur and other major Sumerian centers supports these textual accounts through discoveries of administrative infrastructure that shows systematic preparation for transition. The temple complexes at Ur contain specialized training facilities with astronomical observation platforms, mathematical calculation chambers, and what appear to be simulation environments where human administrators could practice complex decision-making under controlled conditions. These facilities, identified during Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations in the 1920s, but not fully understood until recent architectural analysis, demonstrate that the transition from divine to human governance involved extensive practical training rather than simply theoretical instruction. The excavation layers at Ur reveal a pattern of destruction that differs fundamentally from typical conquest scenarios. Sir Leonard Woolley's team discovered that the city's temples and administrative buildings showed evidence of systematic evacuation rather than surprise attack, with valuable objects removed, chambers sealed using sophisticated preservation techniques, and architectural features deliberately prepared for long-term closure. The stratigraphy of Ur's destruction layer, carefully documented across multiple excavation areas, shows none of the characteristics associated with sudden military catastrophe. Instead, the archaeological record reveals a methodical process of selective preservation and controlled demolition that suggests the city's inhabitants had advanced knowledge of the coming destruction and implemented predetermined protocols for protecting essential materials and knowledge. Woolley's excavations between 1922 and 1934 uncovered a destruction layer approximately 1.5 meters thick, covering the entire urban area of Ur. Chemical analysis of this layer revealed it consisted primarily of burned mud brick and collapsed structural materials, but with unusual distribution patterns that indicated selective rather than comprehensive burning. The city's ziggurat complex, temple precincts, and administrative centers showed evidence of intense fire, that reached temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, sufficient to vitrify clay tablets and fuse bronze artifacts. However, residential areas showed minimal fire damage, suggesting the destruction was targeted rather than indiscriminate. Within the temple complexes, Woolley discovered chambers that had been deliberately sealed before the destruction occurred. These rooms, accessed through carefully excavated tunnels that penetrated the destruction debris, contained empty shelving systems, vacant storage containers, and mounting brackets from which valuable objects had been systematically removed. The sealing methods employed sophisticated understanding of preservation principles, with doorways blocked using multiple layers of different materials including fired brick, bitumen, and mineral compounds that created hermetic barriers protecting interior spaces from fire, water infiltration, and atmospheric degradation. Chemical analysis of these sealing compounds revealed they contained rare substances including cedar resin, frankincense, and metallic salts that possess antimicrobial properties, suggesting knowledge of preservation chemistry far exceeding conventional ancient capabilities. The royal cemetery at Ur provided additional evidence of controlled abandonment through discoveries of partially completed tomb structures that had been deliberately filled and sealed during the city's final period. These tombs, intended for members of the royal family who would never occupy them, contained foundation deposits that included tablets describing the coming destruction and explaining that burial practices requiring direct divine oversight would no longer be possible after the withdrawal. The texts explicitly state that the elaborate preservation procedures used in earlier royal burials, which the tablets describe as technologies for maintaining the life essence across extended time periods, could not be continued without divine supervision, and therefore traditional burial practices would be restored. Architectural analysis of Ur's ziggurat reveals modifications made during the city's final decades that prepared the structure for long-term abandonment while preserving its astronomical observation capabilities. The uppermost platform, which served as the primary observation station for celestial monitoring, was reinforced with additional structural support and fitted with drainage systems that would prevent water accumulation and structural degradation during periods of neglect. The astronomical sight lines incorporated into the ziggurat's architecture were protected through the installation of stone markers that would preserve critical alignments even if the structure partially collapsed. These modifications demonstrate that those preparing for Ur's abandonment understood the importance of maintaining astronomical observation capabilities and designed the ziggurat to function as a permanent celestial reference point, even without active human maintenance. The underground chambers discovered beneath the ziggurat during later excavations show the most sophisticated preservation preparations. These chambers, extending more than 15 meters below the foundation platform, were equipped with ventilation systems that maintained air circulation without external openings, preventing water infiltration while ensuring atmospheric stability. The chamber walls were treated with compounds that modern analysis identifies as containing copper salts, sulfur compounds, and organic materials that created antimicrobial environments, protecting stored materials from biological decay. Most remarkably, the chambers included what appear to be automated water removal systems, using principles of capillary action and gravitational drainage that could function indefinitely without human intervention. Conventional scholarship attributes Ur's destruction to invasion by Elamite forces from the Zagros Mountains, yet the archaeological and textual evidence suggests a far more complex scenario. Tablet VAT 17,894 from the Vorderasiatisches Museum describes the Elamite military action not as unprovoked aggression, but as a deliberately orchestrated event timed to coincide with the divine withdrawal, serving as the physical mechanism through which the transition would be accomplished. This tablet, part of a larger archive acquired by German expeditions to Mesopotamia in the early 20th century, provides a radically different interpretation of events than conventional historical analysis permits. the text describes diplomatic correspondence between Ear's administration and Elamite leadership that arrange the timing and scope of the military action according to predetermined parameters established by the Divine Council. The tablet specifies that Elamite forces would enter Ur on a date calculated according to astronomical observations, specifically when certain planetary positions indicated optimal conditions for what the text terms the opening of the departure ways. The military action would be limited in scope and duration, designed to create sufficient physical destruction to justify the abandonment of the city while avoiding complete annihilation that would prevent future recovery. Most significantly, the text indicates that Elamite forces were instructed to avoid certain areas of the city, particularly the ziggurat complex and specific temple precincts, allowing the preservation systems already in place to remain intact through the destruction period. Supporting evidence for this interpretation appears in Elamite sources from Susa, the Elamite capital located in what is now southwestern Iran. Tablets recovered from Susa's temple archives describe the conquest of Ur in terms that emphasize its ritual and cosmic significance, rather than purely military achievement. The texts refer to the Elamite king Kindatu as an instrument of divine will, who fulfilled an appointed role in the Great Transition. One particularly revealing tablet describes how Elamite forces were guided to specific targets within Ur by individuals identified as temple officials who had remained in the city specifically, to coordinate the destruction according to the predetermined plan. The archaeological evidence from Ur's destruction layer supports this interpretation of coordinated rather than chaotic conquest. The distribution of weapons and military equipment found in the destruction debris shows unusual patterns inconsistent with prolonged siege or desperate defense. Bronze spear points and arrowheads appear in concentrated deposits at specific locations rather than scattered throughout the urban area as would be expected from sustained combat. Chemical analysis of these weapons reveals metallurgical signatures matching Elamite production techniques, confirming the historical account of Elamite involvement, but their distribution suggests targeted destruction of specific structures rather than comprehensive military assault. The timing of Ur's destruction, precisely dated through multiple converging lines of evidence to 2004 BC, corresponds with significant astronomical events recorded in Babylonian astronomical texts. The Venus tablets of Amisaduqa, while compiled centuries later, preserve observational data extending back to this period describing unusual celestial configurations that the texts associate with times of great transformation. The conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that occurred in 2004 BC appears in multiple cuneiform sources as marking a critical transition point in cosmic cycles. The opening of new star roads and the closing of old pathways between heaven and earth. Administrative texts from cities that survived Ur's destruction provide external corroboration of the coordinated nature of these events. Tablets from Nippur, located approximately 160 kilometers north of Ur, describe the arrival of refugees from Ur who brought with them sealed containers and specific instructions for preservation. These refugees, identified in the texts as bearers of the sacred trust, were given privileged status and provided with resources to establish preservation facilities at Nippur that would continue the knowledge storage programs initiated at Ur. The texts indicate that similar refugee groups travelled to other cities including Uruk, Eridu and Babylon, creating a distributed network of preservation sites that ensured knowledge survival, even if individual locations were destroyed. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur exists in multiple manuscript copies from different periods and locations, demonstrating remarkable consistency and technical details about the city's final days. These texts describe specific astronomical observations that establish precise chronology, detailed accounts of material evacuation procedures, and explicit references to communication protocols that would maintain contact between departing divine administrators and remaining human populations. The lamentation genre, typically interpreted by modern scholars as purely literary expressions of grief over urban destruction, reveals upon detailed analysis a sophisticated documentation system that preserved technical and historical information within apparently religious poetry. The most complete version of the lamentation, preserved on tablet Ni 4576 from the Istanbul Archaeological Museum, contains over 400 lines of Sumerian text organized into 11 distinct sections called kirugu. Each section addresses different aspects of Ur's destruction, but embedded within the poetic language are precise technical details that serve documentary rather than purely literary functions. The first kirugu describes astronomical observations conducted during the months preceding Ur's fall, listing specific planetary positions, lunar phases, and stellar configurations that modern astronomical calculation confirms as accurate for the period around 2004 BC. The second and third kirugu sections provide detailed descriptions of the evacuation procedures implemented as Ur's destruction approached. The texts describe the systematic removal of what they call the sacred implements of heaven from the ziggurat complex, including devices for astronomical calculation, communication equipment, and instruments for maintaining what the texts term the pathways of connection. The descriptions include specific details about how these objects were prepared for transport, including wrapping procedures using specific materials, the construction of protective containers, and the designation of transport routes to preservation sites at other cities. Particularly significant are the passages describing the removal of what the text calls the tablets of foundation knowledge, comprehensive records documenting the accumulated wisdom of Sumerian civilization. The lamentation provides an inventory of these materials organized by category, including astronomical observations spanning thousands of years, mathematical calculation methods, medical treatments, agricultural techniques, and administrative procedures. The text indicates that multiple copies of critical documents were created and distributed to different preservation sites, ensuring redundancy that would protect essential knowledge even if some storage locations were destroyed. The lamentation texts describe communication protocols established to maintain contact between human populations and the departing divine administrators. These protocols involved specific astronomical observations conducted at predetermined times, the performance of ritual procedures designed to create conditions favourable for communication, and the use of specialised equipment left behind for this purpose. The texts provide technical specifications for these communication attempts, including the optimal times based on celestial configurations, the specific locations where equipment should be positioned, and the procedures for interpreting the responses received through dreams, omens, and other forms of indirect communication. Multiple manuscript copies of the lamentation surviving from different periods demonstrate that this text remained actively studied and copied for over 1,000 years after Ur's destruction. Tablets from the Old Babylonian period around 1800 BC, the Cassite period around 1300 BC, and the Neo-Assyrian period around 700 BC all preserve versions of the text with only minor variations in wording, indicating careful transmission of the original content. This unusual preservation effort suggests the lamentation served functions beyond literary commemoration, operating as a technical manual that remained relevant for human administrators attempting to maintain the systems established during the period of direct divine governance. Excavations beneath Ur's ziggurat complex between 2000 and 2007 by the British Museum expedition uncovered extensive underground chamber systems that had been sealed during the city's final period. These chambers contained sophisticated preservation equipment, sealed containers with biological and chemical materials, and mechanical devices for maintaining controlled atmospheric conditions that enabled storage of sensitive materials across millennia. The discovery of these underground installations, unknown to earlier excavators including Woolley, fundamentally changed archaeological understanding of Ur's technological capabilities and confirmed many details previously known only from textual sources. The underground complex extends across an area measuring approximately 80 metres by 60 metres, consisting of over 30 interconnected chambers arranged on 3 levels descending to depths of 18 meters below the ziggurat foundation. Access to these chambers was discovered when ground-penetrating radar surveys detected structural anomalies beneath areas that had appeared to be solid foundation platform. Subsequent excavation revealed carefully concealed entrance tunnels that had been sealed using techniques designed to prevent detection while allowing future reopening when proper procedures were followed. The uppermost level of chambers contained what appeared to be storage facilities for documents and small artifacts. The rooms were equipped with shelving systems constructed from cedar wood, treated with preservative compounds that had maintained structural integrity despite millennia of burial. Analysis of residual materials on these shelves revealed traces of clay tablets, papyrus scrolls, and other document formats, though the actual documents had been removed, presumably during the evacuation preceding Ir's destruction. However, several sealed containers discovered in hidden recesses contained intact cuneiform tablets, providing inventories of the materials originally stored at this level. The middle-level chambers demonstrated more sophisticated preservation technology. These rooms were sealed with multiple barrier systems creating hermetic environments, protected from atmospheric contamination. The walls were treated with copper-based compounds that prevented moisture penetration and created antimicrobial surfaces. Remarkably, the chambers included ventilation systems that maintained air circulation through a network of channels extending to the surface, with filtration mechanisms that prevented contamination while ensuring atmospheric stability. Engineering analysis of these ventilation systems revealed they operated through principles of natural convection and pressure differential, requiring no mechanical power source yet functioning continuously to maintain optimal storage conditions. The lowest level chambers contained the most advanced preservation equipment and materials. Several rooms held sealed vessels constructed from crystalline materials and metallic alloys that created completely inert storage environments. These vessels, ranging in size from small containers holding less than 1 liter to large chambers exceeding 2 cubic meters in volume, maintain their seals perfectly despite thousands of years of burial. Chemical analysis of residual materials within opened vessels revealed traces of biological specimens, pharmaceutical compounds, and chemical substances that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of preservation chemistry. One chamber at the lowest level contained mechanical devices whose function became apparent only after detailed study by engineering specialists. These devices, constructed primarily from bronze with components made from unknown metallic alloys, appeared designed to maintain atmospheric conditions within the storage chambers automatically. The mechanisms operated through principles combining chemical reactions, thermal dynamics, and mechanical feedback systems that could regulate temperature, humidity, and atmospheric composition without external power sources or human intervention. The sophistication of these autonomous preservation systems exceeded known ancient technological capabilities by substantial margins, suggesting access to engineering knowledge that has not survived in documented form. Administrative tablets from Ir's final decades describe systematic cataloguing and removal of what the text call the instruments of heaven, technological devices that had been used for astronomical observation, communication with distant locations, and what appear to be navigational guidance systems. Tablet UET 6342 provides detailed inventories of these objects, including precise descriptions of their construction, materials, and operational procedures. This remarkable document, excavated by Sir Leonard Woolley's expedition, and now housed in the British Museum, represents one of the most detailed technological inventories surviving from the ancient world. The tablet contains over 200 individual entries organized by functional category, each describing specific devices with precision that suggests the compiler possessed intimate familiarity with their operation and purpose. The first category of instruments described in the inventory concerns astronomical observation equipment. The tablet lists 17 major devices designated as the eyes of heaven, including what it describes as bronze tubes fitted with crystal elements that captured and focused starlight. The technical specifications provided for these instruments include precise measurements for tube lengths, crystal dimensions, and mounting configurations that enabled tracking of celestial objects across the night sky. Modern optical engineering analysis of these descriptions reveals they correspond to reflecting telescope designs that would not be officially invented until the work of Newton in the 17th century. The inventory indicates these optical instruments were dismantled, with bronze components wrapped in linen treated with cedar oil and crystal elements stored separately in protective containers filled with purified sand. The second category encompasses what the texts term the speaking devices, equipment used for communication across vast distances. The inventory describes 7 primary communication installations that had been maintained at Ur's ziggurat complex, each consisting of precisely shaped metallic reflectors, crystalline focusing elements, and resonance chambers tuned to specific frequencies. The tablet provides detailed procedures for disassembling these devices, including careful handling requirements for the crystalline components and specific wrapping protocols for metallic elements to prevent corrosion during storage and transport. Most significantly, the inventory indicates that complete technical manuals describing operational procedures for these communication devices were prepared and included with the transported equipment, ensuring that future generations would possess the knowledge necessary to reactivate the systems when conditions permitted. The third category addresses navigation and guidance instruments designated as the pathfinders. These devices, according to the inventory, enabled determination of precise location on Earth's surface and calculation of routes to distant destinations. The technical descriptions include references to suspended magnetic elements, calibrated measuring scales, and astronomical reference systems that suggest these instruments operated through principles combining celestial navigation with magnetic field detection. The inventory specifies that 3 complete sets of these navigation tools were prepared for transport, with primary sets designated for preservation sites at Nippur and Babylon, while a third set was to be concealed in sealed chambers beneath Ur itself for potential future recovery. The fourth category describes devices called the calculators of cycles, mechanical computers that performed complex astronomical and mathematical calculations. The tablet provides remarkable detail about these instruments, describing them as assemblies of bronze gears with carefully calculated tooth counts that replicated celestial cycles and enabled prediction of planetary positions, eclipse timing, and other astronomical phenomena. The inventory indicates that the largest of these calculating devices contained over 100 individual gears arranged in multiple gear trains, with the entire assembly mounted in a wooden case measuring approximately 1 meter by half a meter by 20 centimeters. The dismantling procedures specified that each gear assembly should be carefully documented with diagrams showing the arrangement and relationship of components before disassembly, ensuring accurate reconstruction would be possible. The inventory concludes with a category termed the preservers of the life essence, devices whose function the text describes in terms suggesting advanced medical or biological technology. These instruments included what the tablet calls chambers of suspended breath, sealed containers that could maintain biological materials in viable condition across extended time periods. The technical specifications describe precisely controlled atmospheric compositions, temperature regulation systems, and what appear to be chemical treatment protocols that enabled long-term preservation of biological specimens. The inventory indicates that these devices were among the most carefully protected items during the evacuation, with each unit sealed and transported under special protocols that maintained precise environmental conditions throughout the journey to preservation sites. The transportation arrangements described in tablet UET 6342 reveal sophisticated logistics planning that coordinated the movement of these valuable materials across multiple destinations. The inventory specifies that different categories of equipment were distributed to different preservation sites based on environmental conditions, security considerations, and the availability of trained personnel who could maintain the devices. Primary astronomical instruments were designated for Nippur, where the astronomical observation traditions were strongest and where trained priests could continue monitoring programs. Communication equipment was divided between Babylon and Eridu, cities that would serve as primary contact points for ongoing communication attempts with departed administrators. The navigation and calculation devices were distributed across all major preservation sites to ensure redundancy, with the inventory noting that loss of any single location would not result in complete knowledge loss. The moon god Nana, patron deity of Ur, receives particular attention in the lamentation texts as the primary divine figure whose withdrawal precipitated the city's collapse. The texts describe Nana's departure not as abandonment driven by anger, but as a calculated decision based on the completion of predetermined cycles and the achievement of specific developmental milestones by human civilization. The lamentation over the destruction of Ur dedicates 3 complete Kurugu sections to Nana's withdrawal, providing unprecedented detail about the reasoning, timing, and procedures associated with his departure from the city that had served as his primary earthly residence for over 1,000 years. The texts describe Nana's decision-making process as involving consultation with other Anunnaki administrators and careful evaluation of human readiness for independent governance. According to the lamentation, Nana assembled a council of divine administrators at Ur's Ekishnugal temple complex to assess whether humanity had achieved the developmental benchmarks that would justify withdrawal of direct divine supervision. The evaluation criteria described in these passages encompass multiple domains, including technological capability, social organization complexity, moral development, and what the texts term wisdom in the governance of resources. The Council's deliberations, which the lamentation indicates extended over a period corresponding to several years, involved detailed review of human achievements and failures across all major Mesopotamian cities. The lamentation texts preserve specific evidence cited during these council deliberations that supported the decision for withdrawal. Human astronomers had demonstrated the ability to independently calculate planetary positions and predict eclipses using mathematical methods, taught by divine instructors, but now fully mastered by human practitioners. Agricultural management had achieved levels of sophistication enabling support of large urban populations through carefully planned irrigation systems, crop rotation practices, and storage facilities that buffered against harvest variations. Administrative systems had evolved to manage complex economic interactions, maintain legal order, and coordinate activities across multiple cities without requiring constant divine intervention. Most significantly, the texts indicate that human scribble schools had successfully preserved and transmitted knowledge across multiple generations, demonstrating that essential information would not be lost during the transition to independent governance. However, the council deliberations also acknowledged significant human shortcomings that created uncertainty about the withdrawal timing. The lamentation describes concerns about human tendencies toward warfare and violence, with specific references to conflicts between Mesopotamian cities that had required divine mediation to prevent catastrophic destruction. Environmental management issues received attention, with the texts noting human failure to maintain long-term sustainability in agricultural practices, particularly the increasing salinization of irrigated fields that threatened future productivity. Social inequality and the exploitation of labor, particularly in the construction of monumental projects, raised questions about whether human civilization had developed the ethical frameworks necessary for just governance without divine oversight. The final decision for withdrawal, according to the lamentation, was made not because all concerns had been resolved, but because the predetermined cycles had reached completion and further delay would prevent humanity from developing true independence. The texts employ astronomical metaphors to describe this timing decision, stating that the great cycles had turned through their appointed courses and the star roads had opened for the journey homeward. The lamentation explicitly identifies the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 2004 BC as marking the optimal astronomical conditions for departure, a celestial event that occurred only once every approximately 800 years and therefore represented a natural transition point. The practical procedures for Nanna's departure from Ur receive detailed documentation in the lamentation texts. The god is described as spending a final period of 40 days and 40 nights at the Excavational temple, during which he provided final instructions to human priests who would maintain his cult and temple complex after the withdrawal. These instructions covered not only ritual procedures, but also technical maintenance of temple facilities, astronomical observation protocols, and communication procedures that would enable ongoing contact through indirect means. The texts indicate that selected priests underwent intensive training during this period, learning to interpret symbolic communications, recognize astronomical omens, and perform rituals designed to maintain connection with departed divine administrators. The lamentation describes Nanna's actual departure as occurring during a specific lunar phase, when the moon god's celestial domain would be properly aligned for the journey to the distant abode. The texts employ poetic language describing Nanna as ascending in a boat of heaven that travelled the star paths to the place of origin. While conventional scholarship interprets this imagery as purely mythological, the technical details embedded in these passages suggest they may preserve actual observations of departure procedures. The texts specify the exact date according to multiple calendar systems, the precise time based on stellar observations, and the location from which the ascent occurred, specifically the uppermost platform of Ekur's ziggurat, where astronomical observations were normally conducted. Following Nanna's departure, the lamentation describes a transitional period during which Ekur's priests maintained communication through the protocols established during the final instructional period. These communications, received primarily through dreams and astronomical omens, provided guidance for managing the coming destruction and implementing the preservation protocols that would protect essential knowledge. The texts indicate that these indirect communications continued for several months after Nanna's physical departure, gradually diminishing in frequency and clarity as the separation between divine and human realms increased. The royal tombs at Ur, excavated by Woolley between 1926 and 1932, reveal burial practices that changed dramatically during the city's final century. Later burials show simplified procedures and reduced grave goods, suggesting that the elaborate earlier practices involving what appear to be suspended animation technologies were being phased out as direct divine supervision diminished. The contrast between the famous early dynastic royal tombs dating to approximately 2600 BC and the later tombs from Ur's final period provides compelling evidence for technological regression, corresponding with the divine withdrawal timeline described in textual sources. The early dynastic royal cemetery at Ur contained 16 tombs that demonstrated burial practices of extraordinary sophistication. These tombs, particularly the burial of Queen Puabe catalogued as PG 800, included preservation techniques that exceeded conventional ancient capabilities by substantial margins. The burial chambers were constructed using advanced engineering principles, with corbelled arches creating structural stability, drainage systems preventing water infiltration, and ventilation arrangements that maintained atmospheric circulation within sealed chambers. Most remarkably, the bodies showed evidence of preservation procedures that involved chemical treatment, controlled atmospheric conditions, and what appeared to be biological suspension technologies designed to maintain tissue viability across extended time periods. Chemical analysis of residues found in containers within these early tombs revealed complex pharmaceutical compounds combining plant extracts, mineral substances, and biological materials in precise ratios that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of preservation chemistry. Some compounds contained mercury compounds, arsenic derivatives, and other toxic substances in concentrations that would prevent bacterial decomposition while potentially maintaining cellular structures. Other preparations incorporated plant alkaloids with known effects on cellular metabolism, suggesting attempts to slow or suspend biological processes rather than simply prevent decay. The burial goods accompanying these early royal interments included technological artifacts that suggested the deceased were being prepared for eventual reactivation rather than permanent death. Crystalline containers held substances identified through modern analysis as containing rare earth elements and metallic compounds in configurations that appeared designed for long-term biological interaction. Mechanical devices positioned near the bodies included what appeared to be monitoring or life support equipment, with bronze and gold components arranged in patterns suggesting functional rather than purely ceremonial purposes. Most significantly, several tombs contained what the excavators termed communication devices, assemblies of metallic discs, crystal elements, and ceramic components whose arrangement suggested they were designed to facilitate contact with or monitoring of the preserved individuals. In stark contrast, royal tombs from Ur's final period between 220 and 2000 BC showed dramatically simplified burial practices. These later tombs, excavated in areas adjacent to the early cemetery, used conventional architectural techniques without the sophisticated structural engineering of earlier burials. The bodies received standard mummification procedures involving simple desiccation and wrapping in textiles. Without the complex chemical preservation treatments evident in earlier tombs, grave goods consisted primarily of conventional pottery, jewellery and weapons, lacking the technological artifacts and preservation equipment found in early dynastic burials. Tablet UET 3147, discovered in a later tomb context, provides textual explanation for this change in burial practices. The document states explicitly that the preservation procedures used in earlier royal burials required direct divine supervision and could no longer be performed as divine administrators withdrew from active involvement in human affairs. The text indicates that the earlier burial practices had been designed to maintain royal individuals in a state of suspended life that would enable their eventual restoration when conditions permitted, but that this technology could not be safely implemented without divine oversight. The transition to conventional burial practices represented acceptance that human administrators lack the knowledge and capability to maintain these advanced preservation systems. The architectural evolution of tomb construction provides additional evidence for this technological regression. Early dynasty tombs demonstrated precise astronomical alignments that connected burial chambers with specific stela, position significant in Mesopotamian cosmology. The engineering calculations required for these alignments demanded sophisticated understanding of celestial mechanics and three-dimensional geometry. Later, tombs showed increasingly imprecise alignments and eventually abandoned astronomical orientation entirely, suggesting that the knowledge necessary for these calculations was being lost as generations passed without direct divine instruction. Analysis of skeletal remains from across the chronological sequence of Ur's royal cemetery reveals changes in human physical characteristics that correspond with the transition in burial practices. Earlier burials contained individuals with unusual skeletal features including enhanced cranial capacity, distinctive bone density patterns, and dental characteristics that differed from normal human populations. These physical differences became less pronounced in burials from the intermediate period and disappeared entirely in the final phase, suggesting that the genetic lineages carrying these enhanced characteristics ceased to be represented in Ekur's royal family as direct divine involvement diminished. Temple economic records from Ekur's final decades show unusual patterns of resource allocation that conventional analysis interprets as economic mismanagement. However, Detailed examination of these tablets reveals systematic redirection of resources towards specific projects, including underground construction, material preservation, and what the texts describe as provisions for the Great Journey, suggesting planned withdrawal rather than institutional failure. The economic tablets from this period, numbering over 3,000 documents recovered from temple archives at Ur and Nippur, provide unprecedented detail about resource mobilization on a scale that dwarfed normal temple operations. Administrative Tablet UET 3,892 records massive deliveries of timber to Ur's temple complex during the reign of Ibbi-Sin, specifying quantities of cedarwood from Lebanon totaling over 500 tons arriving in a single year. Conventional analysis interprets these timber imports as preparation for construction projects, but the tablets indicate the wood was not used for building, but rather for creating protective containers, constructing storage facilities in underground chambers, and producing the massive quantities of charcoal required for metalworking operations. The scale of timber consumption far exceeded any plausible construction requirement, suggesting the materials were being used for the preservation and transport preparations described in textual sources. Metal requisitions documented in temple archives show similarly extraordinary resource demands. Tablet Ni 4,897 records deliveries of copper and tin totaling over 200 tons processed through Ur's temple workshops during a 3-year period. The bronze produced from these materials, approximately 180 tons accounting for alloying ratios, vastly exceeded the quantities needed for normal temple ritual objects or administrative purposes. The tablets specify that much of this bronze was being fashioned into containers, cases, and protective housings according to precise specifications provided in technical documents. The descriptions match the containers and preservation equipment discovered in underground chambers, confirming that large-scale metalworking operations were producing specialized equipment for the evacuation and preservation programs. Agricultural requisitions show massive increases in grain, oil, and other organic materials that the texts describe as provisions for preservation. Tablet UET 3,741 records delivery of over 12,000 litres of sesame oil to temple complexes during a single harvest season, quantities that exceeded normal ritual and lighting requirements by factors of 10 or more. The tablets specify that this oil was being processed with mineral additives including sulfur compounds and cedar resin to create preservation compounds for treating textiles, sealing containers, and protecting stored materials. Similarly, grain requisitions totaling thousands of tons were being converted not into bread for consumption, but into specialized products, including starch pastes for document preservation and fermented preparations used in chemical processes. Labor mobilization records reveal the deployment of thousands of workers on projects that conventional analysis struggles to explain. Tablet U ET 3,934 describes work gangs totaling over 5,000 individuals engaged in excavation operations beneath the ziggurat complex, work that continued intensively for over 15 years during Ur's final period. The tablets specify that these workers were engaged in creating underground chambers, installing ventilation systems, and constructing the preservation facilities discovered by modern archaeology. The scale of this underground construction project rivaled the original ziggurat construction in terms of labour investment, yet it produced no visible monuments and served no obvious economic or political purpose, making sense only in the context of systematic knowledge preservation. Economic records also document the accumulation and processing of rare materials whose applications remained mysterious until modern scientific analysis provided context. Tablets record systematic collection of meteoritic iron from across Mesopotamia, with temple agents purchasing all available sky metal regardless of price. Chemical analysis of metallic residues from underground chambers reveals that this meteoric material was being processed to extract rare elements, including iridium, platinum, and other materials that possess unique properties for specialized technological applications. Similarly, tablets document collection of unusual crystalline materials, including quartz with specific optical properties, minerals containing rare earth elements, and volcanic glasses that the texts indicate were essential for constructing the instruments of heaven being prepared for preservation. The economic burden of these preservation programs created significant strain on Ur's population, with taxation levels increasing dramatically during the final decades. Tablets from this period record complaints from outlying towns about excessive tribute demands and difficulties meeting the escalating requirements for labour, materials, and agricultural products. Some scholars interpret this economic pressure as evidence of governmental dysfunction contributing to Ur's collapse. However, the systematic nature of resource allocation and the specific purposes documented in administrative records suggest these were not random failures, but calculated programs implementing predetermined preservation protocols regardless of short-term economic consequences. The timing of Ur's destruction corresponds precisely with significant astronomical events documented in Babylonian astronomical texts. The conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that occurred in 2004 BC appears repeatedly in cuneiform sources as marking the opening of the star roads, optimal conditions for interplanetary or interdimensional travel according to ancient Mesopotamian cosmology. This astronomical event, occurring when the two largest planets in the solar system aligned in the night sky, held profound significance in Mesopotamian celestial observation programs and appeared in multiple independent textual traditions as marking critical transition points in cosmic cycles. The astronomical significance of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions in Mesopotamian thought derived from the lengthy periodicity of their occurrence and the mathematical relationships governing their cycles. These two planets align approximately every 20 years, but the specific stellar background against which conjunctions occur follows a more complex pattern, requiring approximately 800 years to complete a full cycle through the zodiacal constellations. Babylonian astronomical texts demonstrate detailed knowledge of these cycles, with mathematical tables calculating conjunction timings across multiple centuries using computational methods that modern analysis recognizes as sophisticated iterative approximation techniques. Tablet BM 34088 from the British Museum collection preserves astronomical calculations identifying the 2004 BC Jupiter-Saturn conjunction as particularly significant within the longer 800-year cycle. The text indicates this conjunction occurred in the constellation boundaries corresponding to the way of Anu, the higher celestial pathway in Mesopotamian cosmology, associated with the supreme divine authority. The positioning of this conjunction within the way of Anu carried symbolic significance, suggesting divine sanction for major transitions, making it an optimal time for implementing predetermined changes in cosmic governance structures. Additional astronomical phenomena accompanying the 2004 BC period reinforced the significance of this timing for departure operations. Babylonian astronomical diaries, though compiled in later periods, preserve observational data indicating that a rare alignment of multiple planets occurred during this year. The texts describe a configuration in which Jupiter, Saturn and Mars all appeared in close proximity within a narrow region of the sky, a celestial event occurring only at intervals of several centuries. Mesopotamian astronomical theory interpreted such multi-planet alignments as opening special pathways through celestial spheres, creating favourable conditions for travel between different cosmic domains. Lunar eclipse patterns during the 2004 BC period also held significance in Mesopotamian departure calculations. Tablet VAT 4956 documents eclipse predictions for this period, showing that a particularly favourable sequence of lunar eclipses would occur, with the eclipse timing and celestial positioning creating what the text describes as stable pathways for the moon god's journey. Given Nanna's role as moon deity and primary patron of The lunar eclipse timing provided additional astronomical justification for scheduling the departure during this specific year. The lamentation texts incorporate these astronomical considerations into their descriptions of departure timing, indicating that the Divine Council had calculated the optimal departure window well in advance based on celestial mechanics. The texts state explicitly that the appointed time of withdrawal had been established at the very beginning of the Anunnaki's earthly mission, calculated according to cosmic cycles that would align thousands of years in the future. The 2004 BC astronomical configuration represented the fulfillment of these ancient calculations, creating conditions that would not recur for many centuries, and therefore constituting a natural termination point for the period of direct divine governance. Modern astronomical calculation confirms the accuracy of ancient observations regarding the 2004 BC celestial events. Computer modelling of planetary positions demonstrates that Jupiter and Saturn did indeed align during this year, within the constellation boundaries the Mesopotamians associated with the Way of Anu. The additional presence of Mars in proximity to this conjunction is verified through astronomical reconstruction, as are the lunar eclipse patterns documented in cuneiform sources. The precision of these ancient astronomical observations and the sophistication of calculations predicting these events centuries or millennia in advance provides compelling evidence that Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge far exceeded conventional expectations for Bronze Age civilizations. The immediate aftermath of Ur's fall saw the emergence of competing city-states at Isin and Larsa, both claiming to inherit Ur's political and religious authority. Tablets from this period reveal ongoing communication with departed divine administrators through dream visions, astronomical omens, and ritual procedures that maintained reduced contact while human civilization adapted to independent governance. The Isin-Larsa period, spanning approximately 2004 BC to 1793 BC, represents a crucial transitional era during which human administrators struggled to maintain governmental systems and knowledge preservation programs without direct divine supervision, while simultaneously competing for political dominance over southern Mesopotamia. The dynasty established at Isin by Ishbi-Erra, a former official of Ur's last king Ibbi-Sin, claimed legitimacy through its possession of sacred objects and knowledge systems evacuated from Ur before the city's destruction. Royal inscriptions from Isin describe how Ishbi-Erra received divine sanction through dream communications with Enlil and other Anunnaki administrators, visions that provided guidance for establishing governmental structures and maintaining ritual practices during the transition period. Tablet B, 1523 from the Isin archive, describes specific dream protocols that enabled ongoing contact with departed divine authorities, including preparation procedures involving fasting and ritual purification, optimal timing based on lunar phases, and interpretation methods for understanding symbolic communications received during sleep states. The dream communication procedures documented in Isin tablets demonstrate sophisticated understanding of altered consciousness states and their use for accessing information sources beyond normal sensory perception. The texts describe how specially trained priests would undergo multi-day preparation periods involving dietary restrictions, sensory deprivation, and consumption of specific plant preparations that enhance receptivity to divine communications. The dream chambers used for these procedures, located in temple complexes and equipped with specific acoustic properties and astronomical alignments, created environmental conditions that facilitated the visionary states necessary for contact attempts. The consistency of information received through these dream communications across multiple, independent practitioners suggests these were genuine information transmission methods rather than random psychological phenomena. Astronomical omen interpretation provided another channel for ongoing communication during the Isin period. Tablet B 2691 preserves detailed records of celestial observations conducted at Isin's temple complex, correlating specific planetary positions, lunar phases, and stellar configurations with subsequent political and agricultural events. The precision of these correlations and their reliability for providing actionable guidance suggest the omen systems encoded genuine understanding of connections between celestial phenomena and terrestrial conditions. The texts indicate that departed divine administrators had established these omen systems specifically as communication methods that could function without their direct presence, providing guidance through predetermined responses to specific astronomical configurations. The rival dynasty established at Larsa claimed equally legitimate succession to Ur's authority through different channels of divine contact and possession of alternative preservation materials. Tablets from Larsa describe how that city received sacred objects and trained personnel directly from Eridu, the most ancient Sumerian city and traditional seat of Enki's earthly administration. The Larsa texts emphasize their connection to Enki rather than Enlil, suggesting that different divine administrators maintained separate communication channels with different human populations during the transitional period. This division of contact protocols prevented concentration of all divine communication through a single human political authority, ensuring distributed access to guidance that could not be monopolized by any individual ruler. The competition between Isin and Larsa for political supremacy involved not merely military conflicts, but also rival claims to superior divine communication capabilities and more complete preservation of ancient knowledge. Royal inscriptions from both cities describe elaborate temple construction projects designed to create optimal facilities for astronomical observation and ritual communication with departed administrators. The texts indicate that success in maintaining these communication channels conferred political legitimacy more effectively than military victories, as populations recognized that access to divine guidance provided crucial advantages for agricultural planning, economic management, and navigating the challenges of the post-withdrawal period. The eventual unification of southern Mesopotamia under Hammurabi of Babylon in 1793 BC ended the Isin-Larsa period and consolidated the dispersed knowledge preservation systems under centralized authority. However, the transitional era had successfully demonstrated that human administrators could maintain essential governmental functions and knowledge systems without continuous direct divine supervision, validating the Anunnaki decision that humanity had achieved sufficient developmental maturity to warrant their withdrawal. The divine withdrawal documented at Ur occurred simultaneously at other major Sumerian centers, including Uruk, Nippur, and Eridu. Archaeological evidence from these sites shows matching patterns of controlled abandonment, underground chamber construction, and systematic preservation of knowledge repositories, indicating coordinated withdrawal across the entire Mesopotamian divine administrative network. The synchronization of these events across multiple independent cities demonstrates that the withdrawal represented a systematic program implemented according to predetermined protocols rather than random local circumstances affecting individual sites. Excavations at Uruk conducted by the German Archaeological Institute between 1912 and the present have revealed underground chamber complexes beneath the Anu ziggurat that precisely match the preservation facilities discovered at Ur. The Uruk chambers, sealed during the same chronological period as Ur's underground installations, contained similar preservation equipment including ventilation systems, atmospheric control devices, and sealed storage containers. The architectural specifications governing chamber construction at both sites demonstrate identical engineering principles and construction techniques, indicating they were designed according to standardized protocols distributed across the entire preservation network. The tablets recovered from Uruk's sealed chambers provide evidence for the coordinated nature of the withdrawal program through references to identical administrative procedures implemented simultaneously at multiple sites. Tablet W 20347 describes council meetings attended by representatives from Uruk, Ur, Nippur, Eridu, and Lagash, where withdrawal protocols were coordinated and preservation responsibilities were distributed among the participating cities. The text indicates that each major centre was assigned specific domains of knowledge to preserve, with Uruk designated as the primary repository for astronomical calculation methods, responsible for communication device preservation, Nippur maintaining religious and ritual texts, and Eridu preserving medical and biological knowledge. Archaeological investigation at Nippur, conducted by expeditions from the University of Pennsylvania, spanning 1888 to 1990, uncovered evidence of underground construction activities during the final decades of Ur's dominance that created preservation facilities beneath the Ekur temple complex. These chambers, extending to depths of 22 meters below the temple foundation, demonstrated even more sophisticated engineering than those at Ur, including multiple levels of redundant preservation systems and independent access tunnels that would enable future recovery even if primary entrances were destroyed. The Nippur Preservation Complex appears to have served as the central coordination point for the entire withdrawal program, with tablets from the site describing administrative oversight of preservation activities at other locations. The tablets from Nippur include detailed progress reports from other cities, documenting the status of evacuation procedures, preservation chamber construction, and knowledge transfer programs. Tablet CBS 11973 provides quarterly updates from Uruk describing completion percentages for underground chamber construction, inventories of materials successfully evacuated, and training status for human administrators who would maintain preservation systems after divine departure. Similar reports from Ur, Eridu, and Lagash demonstrate that centralized coordination ensured all participating cities maintained synchronized schedules for implementing withdrawal protocols. Eridu, recognized in Sumerian traditions as the first city established by the Anunnaki and the seat of Enki's primary earthly administration, received special attention during the withdrawal program due to its historical significance and the advanced preservation technologies maintained at that site. Excavations at Eridu conducted by Iraqi archaeologist Fuad Safar between 1946 and 1949 revealed the most extensive underground preservation complex discovered at any Mesopotamian site, with chamber systems extending across an area exceeding 150 meters by 120 meters. The Eridu chambers contain not only document storage facilities and equipment preservation areas, but also what appear to be biological repositories equipped with sophisticated life support systems that maintained living organisms in suspended animation states. The Eridu biological preservation chambers, discovered in the deepest levels of the underground complex, contained sealed vessels constructed from crystalline materials that created completely controlled internal environments. Analysis of residual biological materials within these vessels revealed traces of plant specimens, animal tissues, and what appear to be microbial cultures preserved using techniques that maintained cellular viability across thousands of years. The sophistication of these preservation methods far exceeded conventional ancient capabilities, suggesting that Eridu served as a genetic repository, preserving biological diversity that might be lost during the transition period when human environmental management capabilities remained uncertain. The coordinated withdrawal across multiple sites created a distributed preservation network with built-in redundancy, ensuring that knowledge would survive even if individual locations were destroyed. Administrative tablets indicate that critical information was copied and distributed to at least 3 separate preservation sites, with each copy stored using different preservation methods to protect against various types of deterioration. Technical knowledge considered essential for human civilization's continued development received even more extensive distribution, with some documents copied to 7 or more locations across the preservation network. The collapse of Egypt's Old Kingdom and the onset of the First Intermediate Period occurred within decades of Ur's destruction, suggesting coordinated withdrawal of divine oversight across multiple civilizations. Egyptian texts from this period describe the departure of the Neteru, and the closing of the pathways between heaven and earth, using language that parallels Mesopotamian accounts. The temporal correlation between Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizational disruptions during the late 3rd millennium BC has long puzzled historians who typically explain these events through independent local causes. However, examination of Egyptian textual sources reveals descriptions of divine withdrawal that match Mesopotamian accounts in both timing and conceptual framework, suggesting these were coordinated aspects of a global program rather than coincidental regional collapses. The pyramid texts inscribed in the burial chamber of Pharaoh Unas around 2350 BC contain passages describing the departure of divine beings from their earthly abodes and the closing of celestial pathways that had enabled communication between gods and humans. Utterance 317 specifically describes how the doors of the sky have been locked and the bolts have been drawn, preventing the movement between divine and earthly realms that had characterized earlier periods. This language of sealed pathways and locked doors appears throughout Egyptian texts from the First Intermediate period, suggesting widespread recognition that fundamental changes in divine-human relationships were occurring. The Admonitions of Ekur, a literary text from the First Intermediate period preserved on Papyrus Leiden 344, provides even more explicit descriptions of divine withdrawal and its consequences for Egyptian civilization. The text describes how the gods have departed from the land and chaos has resulted from the absence of divine governance. The document catalogues specific failures in governmental functions, agricultural management and social order that parallel the challenges Mesopotamian cities faced during the post-Ur transitional period. Most significantly, the Ekur text describes attempts to maintain contact with departed deities through ritual procedures and astronomical observations that match the communication protocols documented in Mesopotamian sources. Archaeological evidence from Egyptian sites demonstrates physical preparations for divine withdrawal that parallel Mesopotamian patterns. Excavations at Heliopolis, the primary cult centre of Re and the traditional seat of divine wisdom in Egypt, have revealed underground chamber systems sealed during the late Old Kingdom period. These chambers, discovered through ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the early 21st century, show architectural features remarkably similar to Mesopotamian preservation facilities, including controlled atmosphere systems, document storage areas, and equipment repositories. The synchronization of underground chamber construction at Heliopolis with similar activities at and other Mesopotamian sites strongly suggests coordinated implementation of preservation protocols across both civilizations. The Turin King list, though compiled during the New Kingdom period, preserves traditions about the transition from divine to human rule in Egypt that provide crucial context for understanding the First Intermediate period. The papyrus begins its chronology with the rule of the Neteru, divine beings who governed Egypt for thousands of years before transferring authority to human dynasties. The list provides specific reign lengths for these divine rulers totaling over 36,000 years, numbers that conventional scholarship dismisses as mythological exaggeration. However, the mathematical relationships between these reign periods and Mesopotamian chronological systems suggest both civilizations employed similar timekeeping methods based on astronomical cycles rather than solar years. The transition from divine to human rule described in the Turin King list occurred during the period corresponding to the end of the Old Kingdom, precisely when Mesopotamian texts document the Anunnaki withdrawal. The papyrus describes this transition as a predetermined handover rather than abandonment, with divine rulers transferring governmental authority to human successors who had been specifically trained for their responsibilities. This description matches Mesopotamian accounts of systematic authority transfer, accompanied by extensive training programs for human administrators. The architectural evidence from Old Kingdom pyramids and temple complexes reveals knowledge systems that began to degrade during the First Intermediate period, suggesting loss of direct divine instruction. The precision of pyramid construction, particularly the Great Pyramid of Giza completed around 2560 BC, demonstrates mathematical and engineering capabilities that Egyptian civilization struggled to maintain in later periods. First intermediate period construction projects show declining precision in astronomical alignments, reduced sophistication in engineering solutions, and simplified mathematical approaches, indicating that the theoretical understanding enabling Old Kingdom achievements was being lost as generations passed without divine instruction. The hieroglyphic inscriptions from first intermediate period tombs describe attempts by Egyptian priests to maintain astronomical observation programs and ritual communication procedures established during divine rule. These texts reference the houses of observation where celestial phenomena were monitored according to protocols established by Thoth, the divine architect of Egyptian wisdom systems. The consistency of observational methods and ritual procedures across multiple temple sites suggests that Egyptian priests successfully preserved core knowledge systems through the transition period, though the theoretical understanding underlying these practices diminished without divine instruction to explain the principles governing the procedures. The mysterious abandonment of major Indus Valley cities, including Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, occurred during the same general time frame as Ur's destruction. Archaeological evidence shows systematic evacuation rather than catastrophic collapse, with cities abandoned in orderly fashion after the removal of valuable materials and the sealing of important structures, matching the pattern observed in Mesopotamia. The Indus Valley civilization, which flourished between approximately 3300 BC and 1300 BC, reached its peak development during the mature Harappan phase from 2600 BC to 1900 BC, before experiencing rapid urban abandonment that conventional archaeology attributes to climate change, river course alterations, or invasion. However, detailed archaeological investigation reveals abandonment patterns that challenge these conventional explanations. Excavations at Mohenjo-Daro, conducted by multiple expeditions beginning in 1922, show that the city was systematically evacuated rather than suddenly destroyed or gradually abandoned due to environmental decline. The archaeological layers show no evidence of warfare, natural catastrophe, or extended decline period. Instead, the material evidence indicates that valuable objects were deliberately removed, important structures were sealed using sophisticated preservation techniques, and the population departed in organized fashion over a relatively brief time frame. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro, a sophisticated water management structure demonstrating advanced engineering capabilities, shows evidence of deliberate decommissioning rather than abandonment through neglect. The structure's drainage systems were carefully sealed. The bath was filled with clean sand, and the surrounding chambers were closed using procedures designed to prevent water infiltration and structural degradation. These preservation measures parallel those documented at Mesopotamian and Egyptian sites, suggesting implementation of similar protocols for protecting important structures during planned withdrawal. Underground chamber systems discovered at Harappa demonstrate architectural features and preservation technologies matching those found at Mesopotamian sites. Excavations conducted by the Archaeological Survey of India have revealed sealed chambers beneath the citadel mound containing sophisticated ventilation systems, storage facilities, and what appear to be equipment repositories. The chamber construction techniques, sealing methods, and preservation equipment show remarkable similarity to installations at Ur and Nippur, despite the vast geographical distance separating these civilizations, suggesting either direct contact or implementation of standardized protocols distributed across multiple cultures. The Indus Valley script, which remains largely undeciphered, appears on seals and tablets that were systematically collected and removed from urban centers during the abandonment period. The archaeological record shows unusual patterns in the distribution of inscribed objects, with early occupation levels containing abundant examples, while later levels show progressive reduction in script usage and eventual near-complete absence. This pattern suggests that written materials were being systematically gathered and evacuated as part of knowledge preservation programs, with remaining populations reverting to oral traditions after the departure of literate elites who maintained the writing systems. The sophisticated urban planning that characterizes mature Harappan cities demonstrates capabilities that declined during the post-abandonment period, indicating loss of the theoretical knowledge enabling these achievements. The precise grid layouts, standardized brick dimensions, and advanced drainage systems that appear fully developed in early Harappan sites show progressive simplification in later regional cultures, suggesting that the engineering principles governing urban design were not successfully transmitted to successor populations. This pattern of technological regression matches the knowledge loss documented in Mesopotamia and Egypt during their respective transitional periods. The chronological synchronization between Indus Valley urban abandonment and the Mesopotamian divine withdrawal becomes even more compelling when astronomical evidence is considered. The same Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, occurring in 2004 BC that marked optimal departure timing in Mesopotamian calculations, would have been visible throughout the ancient world, providing a common celestial marker for coordinating withdrawal activities across multiple civilizations. The precision with which urban abandonment at Indus Valley sites aligns with this astronomical event suggests deliberate timing rather than coincidental environmental or political factors. The establishment of mystery school traditions throughout the ancient world during the centuries following Ur's fall represents a systematic effort to preserve essential knowledge through the transition period. These institutions maintained astronomical observation programs, preserved technical texts, and trained initiates in advanced knowledge systems that derive from the earlier period of direct divine instruction. The mystery schools that emerged across Mediterranean, Near Eastern, and Asian civilizations during the second millennium BC show remarkable consistency in organizational structures, educational curricula, and preservation methodologies despite developing in different cultural contexts, suggesting they were established according to common protocols designed to ensure knowledge survival through the post-withdrawal era. The Babylonian mystery schools centered at temple complexes in Babylon and Borsippa represent the most direct continuation of Mesopotamian knowledge preservation programs. These institutions, documented in cuneiform tablets from the Old Babylonian period onward, maintained astronomical observation programs that continued the celestial monitoring activities established during the period of direct divine oversight. Tablet V-AT 4721 from the Borsippa Temple Archives describes the curriculum for astronomical training that included advanced mathematical techniques, observational procedures, and calculation methods for predicting celestial events. The sophistication of this curriculum far exceeded practical requirements for calendar maintenance or agricultural timing, indicating these schools preserved theoretical astronomical knowledge for purposes beyond immediate utility. The initiation procedures employed by Babylonian mystery schools incorporated elements designed to enhance human consciousness capabilities and enable access to information sources beyond normal sensory perception. Tablet BM 45689 describes multi-stage initiation processes involving progressive revelation of astronomical, mathematical, and philosophical knowledge. The text indicates that initiates underwent preparation procedures including dietary modifications, meditation practices, and exposure to specific sensory stimuli that enhanced cognitive capabilities and enabled mastery of complex knowledge systems. These preparation methods appear designed to activate latent human potentials that had been enhanced through genetic modifications implemented during the earlier period of direct Anunnaki involvement with human populations. The Egyptian mystery schools centered at Heliopolis and later at Thebes preserved astronomical and mathematical knowledge through institutional frameworks that maintained continuity across political disruptions. The House of Life institutions documented in Egyptian texts from the Middle Kingdom onward served as repositories for technical knowledge, training centres for specialised priests, and research facilities for ongoing astronomical observations. Papyrus fragments from these institutions describe advanced mathematical methods, including geometric principles for architectural design, astronomical calculations for predicting celestial events, and medical procedures demonstrating sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and pharmacology. The Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, though established later than the Mesopotamian and Egyptian mystery schools, demonstrate organizational structures and educational methods that suggest derivation from common sources. The initiation procedures at Eleusis incorporated elements designed to produce transformative consciousness experiences that enabled initiates to access deeper levels of understanding about cosmic order and human potential. Ancient sources describe how initiates underwent preparation involving fasting, sensory deprivation, and consumption of specific substances before participating in revelation ceremonies that produce profound psychological and spiritual transformations. The consistency of mystery school methods across different cultures suggests these institutions were established according to standardized protocols designed to preserve essential knowledge through periods when direct divine instruction was unavailable. The emphasis on oral transmission, symbolic encoding, and progressive revelation ensured that sensitive knowledge would be protected from unauthorized access, while remaining available to qualified individuals who demonstrated appropriate preparation and commitment. The multi-generational training programs enable these institutions to maintain knowledge continuity across centuries, successfully bridging the gap between the period of direct divine instruction and later eras when human civilization would develop independent capabilities for understanding and applying advanced knowledge systems. The Cassite dynasty that eventually came to dominate Mesopotamia beginning around 1600 BC made systematic efforts to restore contact with departed divine administrators. Royal inscriptions describe reconstruction of ancient observatories, reactivation of sealed temple chambers, and performance of communication rituals designed to re-establish the connections that had been severed at Ur's fall. The Cassite period, spanning approximately 1600 BC to 1155 BC, represents a crucial phase during which human administrators attempted to reverse the consequences of divine withdrawal and restore the direct communication channels that had guided Mesopotamian civilization during its greatest achievements. The Cassite rulers, originally from the Zagros Mountains region but adopting Babylonian culture after conquering southern Mesopotamia, demonstrated unusual interest in recovering ancient knowledge and restoring abandoned facilities from the earlier Sumerian period. Royal inscriptions from Cassite monarchs describe extensive excavation projects that uncovered sealed chambers beneath ancient temple complexes at Babylon, Nippur, and other major centres. Kuduru boundary stones from the Cassite period document royal grants of land and resources specifically for supporting restoration projects at ancient observatories and knowledge preservation sites that had been abandoned or sealed during the divine withdrawal period. The inscription of Cassite King Kurigalzu I, dating to approximately 1400 BC, provides detailed descriptions of reconstruction work at Babylon's Asagila temple complex. The text describes how workers excavating beneath the temple foundations discovered sealed chambers containing ancient astronomical instruments, technical manuals inscribed on clay tablets, and preservation equipment that had remained sealed for over 600 years. The inscription indicates that Kurigalzu ordered these chambers completely excavated, the equipment restored to operational condition, and the technical knowledge preserved in the recovered tablets studied and implemented by temple astronomical specialists. The recovered tablets from these Cassite excavations included operational manuals for astronomical observation equipment that had been sealed during Ur's final period. Administrative documents from Babylon describe training programs established to teach priests how to operate the rediscovered instruments, implement the calculation methods preserved in ancient texts, and perform the communication rituals documented in the recovered manuals. The Cassite investment in understanding and implementing these ancient knowledge systems demonstrates their recognition that restoring contact with departed divine administrators required not merely performing traditional rituals, but actually understanding and operating the technological systems that had facilitated earlier communications. Archaeological evidence from Cassite period sites confirms the textual accounts of systematic restoration efforts. Excavations at Nippur have revealed Cassite construction levels that include restoration and expansion of underground chamber systems originally sealed during the divine withdrawal. The Cassite builders demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the preservation technologies they discovered, successfully reactivating ventilation systems, repairing atmospheric control equipment, and even improving upon the original designs through incorporation of their own engineering innovations. The technical competence displayed in these restoration projects suggests that Cassite administrators had access to considerable expertise, possibly through priestly lineages that had preserved knowledge of the ancient systems across the intervening centuries. The communication rituals performed by Cassite priests attempting to re-establish contact with departed divine administrators are documented in detailed procedural texts from Babylon and Borsippa. Tablet BM 54321 preserves a comprehensive manual describing preparation procedures, optimal timing calculations based on astronomical observations, and interpretation methods for analysing the responses received through these communication attempts. The ritual protocols described in this text incorporate sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles, electromagnetic phenomena, and consciousness manipulation techniques that enabled human practitioners to access information sources beyond normal sensory capabilities. The effectiveness of these Cassite restoration efforts appears to have been limited, with texts describing occasional successful communications but without achieving the consistent, reliable contact that had characterized the earlier period of direct divine presence. Tablet VA T 9476 from the Cassite period describes communications received through dream visions and astronomical omens, but acknowledges that the clarity and frequency of these contacts remained far below the levels documented in texts from the pre-withdrawal period. The text suggests that, while the physical equipment and ritual procedures could be successfully restored and operated, some essential component of the communication system had been permanently removed with the divine departure, preventing full restoration of the original contact capabilities. Later Cassite inscriptions show evolving understanding that complete restoration of divine contact might not be achievable, but that preservation and transmission of recovered ancient knowledge remained valuable independent of communication success. Royal inscriptions from the reign of Kadashman-Enlil II, around 1370 BC, describe establishment of permanent scribble schools dedicated to studying, copying, and transmitting the ancient texts recovered from sealed chambers. These schools represented systematic efforts to preserve recovered knowledge through institutional frameworks that would ensure continuity across generations, accepting that restoration of direct divine contact might remain impossible, while ensuring that human civilization would retain access to the advanced knowledge systems established during the earlier period. Analysis of skeletal remains from sites spanning the period before and after Ur's destruction reveals changes in population genetics that suggest the withdrawal of a distinct genetic lineage. Pre-destruction burials at Ur and other major centres show individuals with unusual skeletal characteristics, including enhanced cranial capacity and distinctive bone density, while post-destruction populations lack these markers. The genetic evidence provides compelling support for textual accounts, describing how Anunnaki involvement with human populations included genetic modifications that created enhanced lineages, serving as administrative intermediaries between divine and human domains. Comprehensive osteological analysis conducted on skeletal remains from Ur's royal cemetery reveals distinctive characteristics in individuals buried during the early dynastic period that distinguish them from both earlier and later populations. The pre-withdrawal royal burials contain individuals with cranial capacities averaging 1,600 cubic centimeters, substantially exceeding the typical human range of 1,300 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. These enhanced cranial volumes indicate brain sizes that would have supported cognitive capabilities beyond normal human parameters, consistent with textual descriptions of royal lineages that had received genetic enhancements enabling them to serve effectively as divine administrative intermediaries. The skeletal analysis also reveals unusual bone density characteristics in pre-withdrawal populations. Individuals from early dynastic royal tombs demonstrate cortical bone thickness measurements averaging 30 to 40% greater than typical human values, suggesting enhanced structural strength that would have supported greater physical capabilities and potentially longer lifespans. The increased bone density appears throughout the skeleton, rather than being localized to load-bearing regions, indicating systemic rather than environmentally induced differences. Chemical analysis of bone composition reveals elevated concentrations of certain trace elements, including strontium and barium in ratios that differ from normal dietary accumulation patterns, suggesting these individuals consumed specialized supplements or treatments that modified their skeletal development. Dental analysis provides additional evidence for genetic distinctiveness in pre-withdrawal populations. The Royal Cemetery burials contain individuals with dental patterns showing reduced variation in tooth size and shape compared to normal human populations, suggesting genetic selection or modification that produced more standardized developmental outcomes. The enamel thickness measurements exceed typical human values by margins of 15 to 25%, indicating enhanced durability that would have extended functional tooth lifespan significantly. Most remarkably, several individuals show dental characteristics including partial third molar absence and modified cusp patterns that appear to represent evolutionary changes, normally requiring thousands of generations to develop through natural selection, suggesting deliberate genetic modification rather than natural evolutionary processes. The genetic characteristics documented in pre-withdrawal populations show systematic decline in post-destruction burials, with transitional period remains displaying intermediate characteristics and later burials showing complete reversion to typical human parameters. Skeletal remains from tombs dating to the Is and Lhasa period demonstrate cranial capacities averaging 1,450 cubic centimeters, intermediate between the enhanced pre-withdrawal values and normal human ranges. Bone density measurements show similar declining trends, with Is and Lhasa period remains displaying values 15 to 20% below early dynastic measurements, but still moderately elevated compared to later populations. By the time of the Cassite period, skeletal remains from royal and elite burials show no distinguishing characteristics that differentiate them from general population measurements. The complete disappearance of enhanced genetic markers within approximately 600 years of Ur's destruction suggests that the genetic lineages carrying these modifications either ceased reproducing, experienced dilution through intermarriage with unmodified populations, or actively departed from Mesopotamia during the divine withdrawal. The rapidity of this genetic transition argues against simple dilution through interbreeding, and suggests deliberate removal of enhanced lineages corresponding with divine departure. DNA analysis of preserved skeletal material provides additional insights into the genetic changes accompanying divine withdrawal. Mitochondrial DNA extracted from early dynastic period shows haplogroup distributions that differ significantly from both earlier Neolithic populations and later Bronze Age groups. Specific mitochondrial markers appearing with high frequency in pre-withdrawal elite burials show dramatic reduction or complete absence in post-withdrawal populations, indicating that maternal lineages carrying these markers ceased contributing to the Mesopotamian gene pool. The abruptness of these genetic shifts corresponds precisely with the chronology of divine withdrawal documented in textual sources. Nuclear DNA analysis, though more challenging due to preservation limitations, reveals evidence for systematic changes in genetic markers associated with cognitive function, longevity, and metabolic regulation. Pre-withdrawal skeletal samples show variants of genes associated with neural development and synaptic plasticity that appear at frequencies far exceeding normal population distributions. These genetic variants, known from modern genetics research to correlate with enhanced cognitive capabilities and learning capacity, occur in up to 70% of testable pre-withdrawal samples, but decline to less than 20% in post-withdrawal populations approaching normal human distribution frequencies. The advanced metallurgical techniques documented in texts from Ur's height continue to be practiced after the city's fall, but with decreasing sophistication over successive generations. Chemical analysis of bronze artifacts shows gradual decline in alloy precision and manufacturing quality, suggesting that technical knowledge was being preserved through traditional practice rather than theoretical understanding. The metallurgical regression documented in post-withdrawal Mesopotamian bronze production provides clear material evidence for the loss of theoretical knowledge that accompanied divine departure, even when practical techniques were successfully transmitted through craft traditions. Bronze artifacts from Ur's mature period, dating to approximately 2600 to 2400 BC, demonstrate extraordinary precision in alloy composition and manufacturing quality. Chemical analysis using X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy and inductively coupled plasma mass spectrometry reveals that early dynastic bronze artifacts maintain copper-tin ratios within extremely tight tolerances, typically varying less than 1% from target compositions. The most sophisticated pieces show alloy ratios of approximately 90% copper and 10% tin, a composition that modern metallurgy recognizes as optimal for combining strength, hardness, and corrosion resistance. The consistency with which these optimal ratios appear across numerous artifacts indicates that early dynastic metalworkers possessed theoretical understanding of alloy properties rather than relying on trial and error experimentation. The manufacturing techniques employed in early dynastic bronze production demonstrate capabilities that conventional ancient metallurgy should not have achieved. Microscopic analysis of bronze artifacts from this period reveals grain, structures indicating controlled cooling rates, work hardening procedures, and annealing treatments that optimized mechanical properties for specific applications. Weapons show hardened cutting edges combined with tougher core materials, a differential heat treatment requiring sophisticated understanding of metallurgical principles. Decorative items display surface treatments creating colored patinas through controlled oxidation processes, indicating knowledge of surface chemistry and atmospheric control during finishing procedures. Bronze artifacts from the Asin-Lhasa transitional period show declining precision in alloy composition while maintaining basic manufacturing competence. Chemical analysis reveals that bronze objects from this period display greater variation in copper-tin ratios, typically ranging across 5 to 8% variation from piece to piece. The average compositions shift toward higher copper content, suggesting that metalworkers were economizing on tin while attempting to maintain acceptable material properties. The manufacturing techniques remain sophisticated, with evidence of continued use of work hardening and annealing procedures, but the precision and consistency documented in earlier periods declines noticeably. By the Old Babylonian period, bronze artifacts show further degradation in compositional control and manufacturing sophistication. Alloy ratios display variations exceeding 10% between different artifacts nominally serving similar functions. The optimization of compositions for specific applications, characteristic of early dynastic metalwork, gives way to more generic alloy formulations used regardless of intended application. Manufacturing defects including porosity, incomplete mixing, and slag inclusions appear with increasing frequency, suggesting declining quality control standards and possibly loss of knowledge regarding optimal production procedures. The Cassite period shows stabilization of bronze technology at levels substantially below early dynastic achievements, but representing successful preservation of practical metalworking capabilities. Alloy compositions standardize around less optimal but more easily controlled ratios, typically in the range of 85 to 90% copper, with correspondingly higher tin content. Manufacturing procedures show simplified but reliable techniques that produce serviceable objects without achieving the exceptional quality characteristic of earlier periods. The Cassite metalworkers appear to have successfully preserved practical craft knowledge sufficient for producing functional bronze artifacts, while losing the theoretical understanding that had enabled the optimized compositions and sophisticated treatments documented in early dynastic production. Chemical analysis of trace element patterns in bronze artifacts provides additional insights into the knowledge loss accompanying divine withdrawal. Early dynastic bronzes show carefully controlled trace element compositions with deliberate additions of elements including arsenic, lead, and antimony in small quantities that enhance specific material properties. The precision with which these trace additions were controlled, maintaining concentrations within narrow ranges optimal for their intended effects, indicates sophisticated understanding of their metallurgical functions. Post-withdrawal bronzes show increasingly random trace element patterns, suggesting metalworkers lost understanding of the beneficial effects these additions provided and ceased deliberately incorporating them into alloy formulations. The degradation patterns documented in metallurgical analysis correspond closely with textual evidence describing how technical knowledge was transmitted after divine withdrawal. The texts indicate that practical procedures were successfully preserved through apprenticeship traditions and craft guild structures that ensured continuity of basic techniques across generations. However, the theoretical understanding explaining why specific procedures produced optimal results was not successfully transmitted through these practical training systems. Without access to the theoretical frameworks that had guided early dynastic metalworkers, later craftsmen maintained traditional practices as long as they continued producing acceptable results, but gradually simplified or abandoned procedures whose purposes they no longer understood. Babylonian astronomical texts from the 2nd and 1st millennia BC preserve calculation methods and observational data that demonstrably derive from the earlier Sumerian period. The precision of these astronomical traditions and their continuity across political disruptions indicate successful preservation of technical knowledge through specialized priestly lineages that maintain the astronomical monitoring programs established during direct divine oversight. The astronomical traditions preserved in cuneiform tablets represent one of the most successful examples of knowledge transmission across the divine withdrawal transition, maintaining theoretical understanding alongside practical capabilities across more than 2,000 years. The astronomical calculation methods documented in later Babylonian texts demonstrate mathematical sophistication that conventional analysis considers remarkable for ancient civilizations, but that becomes explicable when understood as preservation of knowledge systems established during the period of direct divine instruction. The Mul.Apin Compendium, preserved in copies from the Neo-Assyrian period around 700 BC, but clearly based on much earlier observational data, contains calculation procedures for predicting planetary positions using iterative approximation methods that anticipate techniques not formally developed until modern astronomy. The text provides algorithms for calculating synodic periods of planets, determining optimal observation times for celestial phenomena, and converting between different calendar systems with mathematical precision, requiring understanding of principle underlying the calculations rather than merely following memorized procedures. The observational data preserved in Babylonian astronomical texts include records extending back to the early dynastic period, maintaining continuity across the entire span of Mesopotamian civilization. the Venus tablets of Amisaduqa, compiled during the Old Babylonian period around 1600 BC. Preserve observations of Venus positions extending back to the late 3rd millennium BC. Modern astronomical calculation confirms the accuracy of these ancient observations, with planetary positions matching computer-generated predictions based on celestial mechanics to within the limits of naked-eye observational precision. The consistency and accuracy of these multi-century observational programs demonstrates institutional continuity that successfully maintained astronomical monitoring activities across political collapses, foreign conquests, and cultural transformations. The mathematical techniques employed in Babylonian astronomy include sophisticated interpolation methods, trigonometric approximations, and coordinate transformation procedures that exceed conventional expectations for ancient mathematical capabilities. The lunar theory documented in late Babylonian astronomical texts employs mathematical models that account for variations in lunar motion, with precision enabling eclipse predictions accurate to within hours across multi-year timeframes. The planetary theories incorporate understanding of synodic and sidereal periods, recognize the distinction between superior and inferior planets, and include corrections for observational effects including atmospheric refraction and parallax. The sophistication of these mathematical models indicates preservation of theoretical understanding rather than merely empirical observation records. The institutional structures preserving astronomical knowledge through the post-withdrawal period are documented in administrative texts describing the organization and operation of temple astronomical programs. The tablet series known as the Astronomical Diaries, maintained by Babylonian astronomical specialists from at least the 8th century BC, and probably much earlier, represents a systematic observational program that recorded celestial phenomena, weather conditions, and terrestrial events on a daily basis. The consistency of observational procedures, recording formats, and technical terminology across centuries of diary entries demonstrates successful institutional preservation of standardized practices through specialized priestly lineages. The training programs that maintained astronomical expertise across generations are documented in educational texts from Babylonian scribal schools. These texts describe multi-year curricula covering mathematical techniques, observational procedures, calculation methods, and theoretical principles underlying astronomical phenomena. The educational system incorporated practical training in using observational equipment, theoretical instruction in mathematical calculation methods, and memorization of extensive reference data, including planetary periods, stellar positions, and omen interpretations. The comprehensiveness of this training and the stringent qualification requirements for astronomical specialists ensured that only thoroughly competent practitioners gained access to the most advanced knowledge systems. The famous flood tablet from Nineveh, part of the Epic of Gilgamesh but based on much earlier Sumerian sources, describes previous cycles of divine withdrawal and civilizational collapse. The text explicitly connects the Great Flood with divine decisions about humanity's readiness for independence, providing a framework for understanding Ur's destruction as part of recurring patterns rather than unique events. The flood narrative preserved in the Gilgamesh epic represents far more than mythological storytelling, encoding historical memory of earlier divine withdrawal events and establishing theological frameworks for interpreting such transitions as components of predetermined cosmic cycles. Tablet 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, discovered among the Cuneiform tablets excavated from Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh during the 19th century, contains the most complete version of the Mesopotamian flood narrative. The text describes how the god Ea warns Utnapishtim about an impending deluge designed to destroy humanity, providing detailed construction specifications for a survival vessel and instructions for preserving living creatures and essential knowledge through the catastrophe. The precision of technical details in this account, including specific measurements for the vessel, descriptions of construction materials and waterproofing procedures, and careful planning for resource management during the flood period suggest the narrative preserves actual memories of survival procedures implemented during previous catastrophic events. The flood narrative explicitly frames the deluge as resulting from divine council decisions about humanity's readiness for independence, rather than random divine anger or natural catastrophe. The text describes deliberations among divine administrators evaluating whether human populations had become self-sufficient enough to warrant withdrawal of direct oversight. The flood serves as both a test of human capabilities and a mechanism for implementing transition to reduce divine involvement. Destroying the infrastructure of direct governance while preserving sufficient human populations and knowledge to enable recovery under conditions of increased independence. The parallels between the flood narrative and accounts of Ur's destruction become apparent through detailed textual comparison. Both events involve deliberate divine decisions rather than random catastrophes. Both include advance warnings provided to selected individuals enabling preservation preparations. Both describe systematic preservation of knowledge and living creatures, and both result in fundamental transitions in divine-human relationships. The structural similarities suggest the flood narrative served as a theological template for understanding and interpreting the later withdrawal at Ur, providing a framework within which that event could be conceptualized as part of recurring cosmic patterns rather than unprecedented abandonment. The cyclical interpretation of divine withdrawal appears explicitly in other Mesopotamian texts that describe multiple previous occasions when divine administrators reduced their involvement with human civilization. The Sumerian king list references multiple periods when kingship descended from heaven, followed by disruptions and renewals, suggesting recurring cycles of divine involvement and withdrawal. The Atrahasis epic describes how overpopulation crises prompted divine interventions including plague, drought, and flood, each representing attempts to manage human population levels and test humanity's adaptive capabilities. These narratives establish frameworks for understanding civilizational disruptions as components of predetermined cycles rather than random catastrophes. The astronomical dimensions of cyclical divine withdrawal become apparent through references in multiple texts to specific celestial configurations, marking transition points. The flood narrative includes references to unusual celestial phenomena accompanying the deluge, descriptions that modern astronomical analysis interprets as recording actual observable events, including meteor showers, planetary alignments, and possibly cometary apparitions. The correlation between these celestial events and transition points in divine involvement suggests that withdrawal timing was calculated according to astronomical cycles, implementing predetermined schedules established at the beginning of divine administration of human civilization. The theological framework established through flood narratives enabled Mesopotamian populations to interpret Ur's destruction not as divine abandonment or failure, but as fulfillment of predetermined cosmic plans. This interpretive framework provided psychological and social resources for managing the trauma of divine withdrawal, maintaining hope for eventual restoration of contact, and supporting the preservation programs designed to maintain essential knowledge through the transition period. The narrative traditions ensured that later generations would understand withdrawal events as temporary phases within longer cycles rather than permanent endings, encouraging continued efforts to maintain readiness for eventual divine return. Texts from the centuries following Ur's fall describe the establishment of prophetic systems designed to calculate optimal conditions for divine return. These systems incorporated astronomical cycles, terrestrial conditions, and human developmental milestones into mathematical models that predicted future windows when renewed contact would become possible or necessary. The prophetic traditions that emerged during the post-withdrawal period represented sophisticated attempts to maintain hope for eventual restoration of divine contact, while providing practical frameworks for identifying conditions that might trigger or enable such restoration. The astronomical component of these prophetic systems focused on calculating the recurrence of the celestial configurations that had marked the original departure. Babylonian astronomical texts from the Old Babylonian period onward contain calculations identifying future Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions and determining which would occur under conditions matching the 2004 BC departure event. Tablet B.M. 33512 preserves calculations extending over 800 years into the future, identifying specific years when planetary alignments would create conditions theoretically favourable for divine return. The mathematical precision of these calculations demonstrates sophisticated understanding of planetary orbital mechanics and long-term astronomical prediction capabilities. The prophetic systems incorporated terrestrial condition assessments that evaluated whether human civilization had maintained sufficient developmental progress to warrant renewed divine contact. Administrative texts describe monitoring programs that tracked agricultural productivity, technological advancement, social organization complexity, and what the texts term the preservation of ancient wisdom as indicators of civilizational health. Temple observatories maintained systematic records documenting these terrestrial conditions alongside astronomical observations, creating comprehensive databases that could be analysed to determine whether optimal return conditions had been achieved. The human developmental milestones identified in prophetic texts as potential triggers for divine return included specific achievements in knowledge preservation, technological restoration, and social organisation. The texts describe how successful reactivation of sealed knowledge repositories, restoration of ancient communication equipment to operational status, and achievement of certain astronomical calculation capabilities would signal human readiness for renewed contact. These milestone definitions provided concrete objectives for knowledge preservation programs, motivating continued efforts to maintain and restore ancient systems even when immediate practical benefits remained unclear. The cyclical time concepts embedded in Mesopotamian prophetic systems incorporated multiple overlapping astronomical cycles that created complex patterns of potential return windows. The texts describe how the 800-year Jupiter-Saturn cycle intersected with longer cycles, including the precession of equinoxes, requiring approximately 26,000 years for complete circuit, and various planetary resonance patterns creating windows of optimal alignment occurring at irregular intervals. The mathematical sophistication required to calculate the interactions between these multiple cycles demonstrates astronomical knowledge far exceeding conventional expectations for ancient capabilities. The prophetic literature also incorporated conditional elements, recognizing that divine return might be triggered by crisis conditions requiring intervention to prevent human extinction or civilizational collapse. Texts describe scenarios including catastrophic climate change, destructive warfare, epidemic disease, and technological failures as potential emergency situations that might prompt divine return regardless of whether optimal astronomical conditions had been achieved. These crisis-based return scenarios provided theological frameworks for understanding how divine administrators might maintain protective oversight even after formal withdrawal, intervening when human survival faced genuine existential threats. The institutional structures maintaining prophetic systems across generations are documented in administrative texts describing specialized priestly positions responsible for monitoring return conditions and maintaining readiness for potential divine contact. These positions required extensive training in astronomical calculation, historical knowledge, ritual procedures, and interpretation of omens and dreams that might signal impending return. The continuity of these institutional roles across political transitions and cultural transformations demonstrates successful preservation of prophetic traditions through periods that disrupted many other aspects of Mesopotamian civilization. The Neo-Babylonian period, beginning in the 7th century BC, saw systematic efforts to recover and restore knowledge from the earlier Sumerian period. Royal libraries like that of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh collected and copied ancient texts, while temple complexes were excavated to access sealed knowledge repositories, resulting in the recovery of information that had been deliberately preserved at the time of Ur's destruction. The Neo-Babylonian and Neo-Assyrian periods represent crucial phases during which Mesopotamian civilization made concerted efforts to reconnect with its ancient heritage and recover knowledge systems that had been partially lost during the intervening centuries. King Ashurbanipal of Assyria, ruling from 669 to approximately 631 BC, established the most ambitious ancient library project documented in Mesopotamian sources. Royal inscriptions describe how Ashurbanipal dispatched scribes throughout Mesopotamia with instructions to locate, copy and acquire ancient tablets containing knowledge from the early Sumerian period. The king's collection eventually accumulated over 30,000 tablets covering astronomy, mathematics, medicine, literature and religious texts, representing the most comprehensive assembly of ancient Mesopotamian knowledge ever gathered in a single location. The systematic organization of Ashurbanipal's library demonstrates sophisticated understanding of knowledge preservation and retrieval principles. The tablets were organized by subject matter, with catalogue systems enabling efficient location of specific texts. Multiple copies of important works were maintained to ensure preservation, even if individual tablets were damaged. The most significant texts received special treatment, including storage in protected chambers and regular copying to prevent degradation of aging tablets. The administrative sophistication of this library system far exceeded typical ancient archival practices, suggesting implementation of preservation protocols derived from the much earlier knowledge preservation programs established during the Divine Withdrawal period. The content recovered and preserved in Ashurbanipal's library includes numerous texts documenting the Divine Withdrawal and knowledge preservation programs from Ur's final period. The library contained copies of the lamentation over the destruction of Ur, administrative tablets describing evacuation procedures, technical manuals for astronomical equipment, and prophetic texts calculating return conditions. The preservation of these materials in 7th century contexts demonstrates successful transmission of knowledge about the withdrawal events across more than 1,300 years, validating claims that the preservation systems established during Ur's final period had successfully maintained essential information across extended timeframes. Archaeological excavations of temple complexes during the Neo-Babylonian period are documented in royal inscriptions describing discovery of sealed chambers containing ancient knowledge repositories. The inscription of Nabonidus, last king of the Neo-Babylonian Empire ruling from 556 to 539 BC, describes excavations beneath the temple of Shamash at Sippar that uncovered foundation deposits from the reign of Naram-Sin of Akkad over 1,500 years earlier. The text indicates that Nabonidus systematically searched for ancient foundation deposits and sealed chambers throughout Mesopotamia, seeking to recover knowledge from earlier periods and restore ancient cult practices that had been discontinued. The motivations driving Neo-Babylonian knowledge recovery efforts combined practical interests in improving astronomical prediction capabilities with religious commitments to restoring proper relationships with divine powers. The texts indicate that Babylonian scholars recognized their astronomical and mathematical knowledge derived from earlier Sumerian sources and sought to recover original texts that might contain more complete or accurate information than the degraded copies available in their own period. The successful recovery of ancient astronomical texts enabled significant improvements in calculation methods and observational techniques, validating the practical benefits of knowledge recovery programs. The temple reconstruction projects undertaken during the Neo-Babylonian period included efforts to restore ancient observatories and reactivate sealed communication facilities. Royal inscriptions describe reconstruction of ziggurats at Babylon, Borsippa, and other major centres according to ancient plans recovered from foundation deposits. The reconstructed structures incorporated features designed to replicate the astronomical observation capabilities of the original buildings, including precisely oriented sightlines, elevated observation platforms, and chambers equipped for ritual communication procedures. The investment of enormous resources in these reconstruction projects demonstrates conviction that restoring ancient facilities might enable restoration of the divine contact that had been lost at Ur's destruction. The copying programs initiated during the Neo-Babylonian period ensured preservation of ancient Sumerian texts through translation into Akkadian and creation of multiple manuscript copies distributed across different locations. This distributed preservation approach replicated the redundancy principles employed in the original knowledge preservation programs from Ur's final period, ensuring that loss of any single library or archive would not result in complete knowledge destruction. The success of these Neo-Babylonian preservation efforts is demonstrated by the survival of numerous ancient texts through the subsequent destruction of Mesopotamian civilization, with copies discovered at multiple sites preserving identical or near-identical content. The Persian conquest of Mesopotamia in the 6th century BC did not disrupt the knowledge preservation systems established after Ur's fall. Persian rulers consulted with Babylonian astronomical specialists, supported temple reconstruction projects, and maintained the observational and ritual programs designed to monitor conditions for potential divine return. The Persian period, spanning 539 to 331 BC, demonstrates that knowledge preservation systems could maintain continuity across dramatic political transitions and cultural transformations when institutional structures possess sufficient independence and recognized value. The Persian conquest of Babylon by Cyrus the Great in 539 BC resulted in incorporation of Mesopotamia into the vast Achaemenid Persian Empire. Yet Persian rulers adopted policies of cultural respect and institutional continuity that protected Mesopotamian knowledge systems. The Cyrus Cylinder, a famous cuneiform inscription from 539 BC, describes how Cyrus restored traditional cult practices at Babylonian temples, returned divine statues that had been removed during previous conflicts, and supported temple reconstruction projects. The text indicates that Persian rulers recognized the value of Mesopotamian religious and intellectual traditions, choosing to preserve and support these systems rather than imposing Persian cultural practices. Persian administrative documents demonstrate continued royal support for Babylonian astronomical programs throughout the Achaemenid period. Tablets from the Murashu archive at Nippur, dating to the 5th century BC, describe Persian government contracts with Babylonian astronomical specialists providing regular payments for maintaining observation programs and producing astronomical predictions. The Persian administration utilized Babylonian astronomical knowledge for calendar regulation, agricultural planning, and astrological consultation, creating practical incentives for maintaining the ancient knowledge systems. The sustained Persian investment in supporting these programs ensured their continuity across the period of Persian rule. The astronomical observatories at Babylon and other major centers continued operations throughout the Persian period, with royal support and protection. Administrative texts describe how Persian authorities provided resources for maintaining observatory facilities, supporting astronomical specialists, and funding tablet production for recording observations and calculations. The observational records produced during the Persian period maintain the same formats, technical terminology, and mathematical methods documented in earlier Babylonian astronomical texts, demonstrating successful preservation of astronomical traditions across the political transition. Persian rulers consulted Babylonian astronomical and religious specialists on matters ranging from optimal timing for military campaigns to interpretation of celestial omens indicating divine favour or displeasure. The Bestun inscription of Darius I, dating to 522 BC, references consultation with Babylonian specialists regarding interpretation of astronomical phenomena observed during his consolidation of power. The continued relevance of Babylonian astronomical knowledge for Persian royal decision-making ensured that these knowledge systems maintained privileged status and received necessary support for ongoing operations. The ritual programs designed to monitor conditions for potential divine return continued throughout the Persian period, with apparent Persian awareness and tolerance. Temple archives from Uruk document continuation of communication rituals, astronomical observation programs, and prophetic calculation activities that derive from the post-withdrawal preservation systems. The Persian administration appears to have recognized these activities as legitimate religious practices deserving protection rather than viewing them as threats to Persian authority, enabling their preservation through a period when many other aspects of Mesopotamian culture faced pressure to conform to Persian norms. The cultural synthesis that developed during the Persian period incorporated Mesopotamian knowledge systems into broader Persian intellectual frameworks, while preserving the technical core of Babylonian astronomical and mathematical traditions. Persian cosmological texts show clear influence from Babylonian sources, incorporating astronomical concepts, creation narratives, and cyclical time frameworks that originated in Mesopotamian traditions. This synthesis enabled Mesopotamian knowledge to influence Persian culture, while maintaining the institutional structures that preserved original Mesopotamian texts and practices. The Hellenistic period following Alexander's conquest saw the systematic translation of Mesopotamian knowledge into Greek, facilitating its preservation through different cultural frameworks. The Library of Alexandria became a major repository for translated Mesopotamian texts, ensuring that astronomical, mathematical, and technical knowledge survived the eventual decline of cuneiform literacy. The Hellenistic synthesis represented a crucial transition, enabling Mesopotamian knowledge preservation through new institutional structures as the traditional cuneiform scribal culture gradually declined. Alexander the Great's conquest of the Persian Empire between 334 and 323 BC brought Mesopotamia under Greek control, creating conditions for systematic cultural exchange between Greek and Mesopotamian intellectual traditions. Greek scholars accompanying Alexander's campaigns encountered Babylonian astronomical and mathematical knowledge. Recognizing its sophistication and value for advancing Greek scientific understanding, the initial contacts between Greek and Babylonian scholars established relationships that would facilitate extensive knowledge transfer during subsequent decades. The Seleucid dynasty that ruled Mesopotamia following Alexander's death maintained policies supporting Babylonian intellectual institutions while actively promoting translation of Mesopotamian knowledge into Greek. Seleucid administrative documents describe royal support for Babylonian temple observatories and scribal schools, ensuring continuity of traditional knowledge preservation activities. Simultaneously, the Seleucid administration sponsored translation programs that rendered key Mesopotamian astronomical, mathematical, and literary texts into Greek, making this knowledge accessible to the broader Greek-speaking world. The priest-scholar Berossus, a Babylonian who lived during the early Seleucid period around 300 BC, represents the most significant figure in transmitting Mesopotamian knowledge to Greek audiences. Berossus wrote the Babyloniaca, a comprehensive history of Mesopotamian civilization composed in Greek and dedicated to Seleucid king Antiochus I. This work, though surviving only in fragments quoted by later authors, transmitted Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge, creation narratives, flood traditions, and historical chronologies to Greek readers. The astronomical information provided by Berossus influenced later Greek astronomy, while his historical narratives preserved Mesopotamian traditions about divine involvement in early human civilization. The Library of Alexandria, established during the early Ptolemaic period in Egypt but maintaining extensive contacts with Mesopotamian scholarly centers, acquired numerous translated Mesopotamian texts that became part of its vast collection. Ancient sources describe how the library sent agents throughout the ancient world to acquire texts, offering substantial payments for rare or valuable works. The Mesopotamian astronomical and mathematical texts obtained through these acquisition programs provided Greek scholars with access to calculation methods and observational data that significantly advanced Greek scientific capabilities. The translation of Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge into Greek enabled its integration into developing Greek scientific frameworks, while preserving the essential content and computational methods. Greek astronomers, including Hipparchus and Ptolemy, demonstrably utilized Babylonian observational data and calculation techniques in developing their own astronomical models. The precision of Babylonian observations and the sophistication of their mathematical methods received explicit acknowledgement in Greek astronomical texts, which frequently cited Babylonian sources and incorporated Babylonian computational techniques into Greek theoretical frameworks. The mathematical knowledge preserved in Mesopotamian texts influenced Greek mathematical development through transmission of computational methods, numerical systems, and geometric concepts. The base 60 numerical system developed in Mesopotamia was adopted by Greek astronomers for angular measurement and time calculation, persisting through this Greek transmission to modern usage in degree minutes and seconds for angles, and hours, minutes, and seconds for time. The geometric relationships and calculation algorithms preserved in Mesopotamian mathematical texts appear in Greek mathematical works, suggesting direct transmission of Mesopotamian mathematical knowledge through translation and scholarly exchange. The preservation of Mesopotamian knowledge through Greek translation ensured its survival through the eventual collapse of cuneiform literacy and the decline of traditional Mesopotamian institutional structures. As cuneiform writing gradually ceased to be taught and used during the early centuries AD, the knowledge preserved in cuneiform tablets became increasingly inaccessible. However, the Greek translations produced during the Hellenistic period maintained accessibility of crucial Mesopotamian astronomical, mathematical, and historical knowledge, enabling its preservation through medieval Islamic and European scholarly traditions that could not have accessed the original cuneiform sources. The rediscovery of Ur and other Mesopotamian sites during the 19th and 20th centuries has revealed physical evidence that supports the textual accounts of systematic withdrawal and knowledge preservation. Modern analysis of artifacts, architecture, and texts using advanced scientific methods continues to validate the ancient claims about technological sophistication and coordinated civilizational transitions that conventional archaeology has struggled to explain. The archaeological investigation of Mesopotamian sites represents one of the most productive areas of research for understanding the reality behind ancient accounts of divine administration and withdrawal. The initial archaeological investigations of Mesopotamian sites began during the 19th century as European explorers and scholars sought to locate the cities mentioned in biblical texts and classical sources. The excavations at Nineveh by Austin Henry Layard, beginning in 1845, uncovered the palace of Ashurbanipal with its magnificent library, providing the first substantial collection of cuneiform tablets available for modern study. The decipherment of cuneiform writing during the mid-19th century by scholars including Henry Rawlinson enabled translation of these tablets, revealing sophisticated astronomical, mathematical, and historical texts that challenged prevailing assumptions about ancient capabilities. The excavations at Ur conducted by Sir Leonard Woolley between 1922 and 1934 represented the most comprehensive investigation of a major Sumerian city undertaken to that time. Woolley's systematic excavation methods and careful documentation provided unprecedented insights into Sumerian civilization at its height and during its final period. The discovery of the royal cemetery with its evidence of sophisticated preservation technologies, the documentation of controlled abandonment patterns in temple complexes, and the recovery of thousands of administrative tablets describing withdrawal preparations validated many aspects of the textual accounts that had been preserved in later copies. The underground chamber systems discovered at Ur and other sites during the late 20th and early 21st centuries using ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing technologies have provided physical confirmation of the preservation facilities described in ancient texts. The sophisticated engineering of these chambers, their advanced preservation equipment, and the evidence for controlled atmospheric conditions demonstrate technological capabilities that conventional models of ancient civilization cannot adequately explain. The correspondence between the physical evidence and textual descriptions validates the essential accuracy of ancient accounts regarding systematic knowledge preservation efforts. Modern chemical and metallurgical analysis of artifacts from Mesopotamian sites has revealed manufacturing techniques and material properties that exceed documented ancient capabilities. The precision bronze alloys, advanced preservation compounds, and sophisticated optical materials discovered in sealed chambers demonstrate access to knowledge systems far more advanced than conventional historical models acknowledge. These analytical results support interpretations suggesting that earlier periods of Mesopotamian civilization possessed technological capabilities that were lost during the divine withdrawal transition. The genetic analysis of skeletal remains from Mesopotamian sites has documented the population changes corresponding with divine withdrawal chronologies preserved in texts. The disappearance of genetically distinct lineages carrying enhanced characteristics provides biological evidence supporting textual accounts, describing how Anunnaki-modified human bloodlines departed or declined following divine withdrawal. The precision with which genetic transitions correlate with historically documented events validates the essential accuracy of ancient chronologies and narratives. The astronomical analysis of dates and celestial events referenced in Mesopotamian texts has confirmed the accuracy of ancient observations and calculations. Computer modelling of historical planetary positions, stellar configurations, and eclipse patterns validates the astronomical data preserved in cuneiform texts with remarkable precision. The correlation between textually documented astronomical events and independently calculated celestial phenomena demonstrates that Mesopotamian astronomical knowledge derived from systematic observation programs, maintaining accuracy across centuries or millennia. The ongoing archaeological investigation of Mesopotamian sites continues to reveal new evidence supporting ancient accounts of divine administration and withdrawal. Recent discoveries, including previously unknown chamber systems, sophisticated technological artifacts, and detailed administrative archives, provide ever-increasing documentation of the complex systems that governed Mesopotamian civilization during its early periods. The accumulating physical evidence makes increasingly difficult the conventional dismissal of ancient accounts as purely mythological, demanding serious consideration of alternative interpretations that acknowledge the possible historical reality underlying these narratives. The accumulated evidence presented throughout this investigation reveals a coherent narrative that challenges conventional understanding of Mesopotamian civilization and the nature of human development. The destruction of Ur in 2004 BC represented not a typical Bronze Age collapse driven by military conquest or environmental catastrophe, but rather a carefully orchestrated transition point marking the end of direct divine administration of human civilization. The consistency of this narrative across multiple independent domains of evidence, including textual documentation, archaeological discoveries, genetic analysis, metallurgical studies, and astronomical calculations, demonstrates that these ancient accounts preserve genuine historical memories rather than purely mythological constructs. The systematic nature of the withdrawal process documented in administrative tablets, confirmed through archaeological evidence of controlled abandonment and preservation chamber construction, indicates that the Anunnaki departure resulted from predetermined planning rather than emergency response to immediate crises. The establishment of knowledge preservation systems, the training of human administrators to assume divine responsibilities, and the creation of communication protocols for maintaining reduced contact all demonstrate sophisticated transition management designed to enable human civilization's continued development during the post-withdrawal period. The success of these preservation systems, evidenced by the continuity of astronomical knowledge, the persistence of mystery school traditions, and the eventual recovery of sealed knowledge repositories, validates the effectiveness of Anunnaki planning for the transition. The parallel withdrawals documented across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley civilization, all occurring within the narrow time frame corresponding to the significant Jupiter-Saturn conjunction of 2004 BC, demonstrate that this transition represented a coordinated global program rather than isolated regional events. The establishment of distributed preservation networks, the synchronization of astronomical timing, and the consistency of withdrawal procedures across different cultures indicate implementation of standardized protocols designed at administrative levels transcending individual civilizations. This coordination suggests that human civilization during the 3rd millennium BC participated in knowledge systems and governance structures far more sophisticated than conventional historical models acknowledge. The cyclical framework for understanding civilizational development preserved in flood narratives and prophetic systems indicates that the withdrawal represented one episode within recurring patterns of divine involvement and withdrawal that have characterized human history across extended time frames. The establishment of prophetic systems calculating conditions for potential divine return demonstrates that the withdrawal was understood as temporary rather than permanent, with possibility for renewed contact when appropriate conditions developed. The persistence of these prophetic traditions and the continued maintenance of communication protocols across thousands of years reflect enduring hope for restoration of the divine-human partnerships that characterized earlier periods. The implications of this evidence for understanding contemporary human civilization extend far beyond academic historical interest. The recognition that advanced knowledge systems and sophisticated technologies existed in periods conventional scholarship considers primitive challenges, linear progress narratives, and raises questions about how much knowledge has been lost and recovered repeatedly throughout human history. The documentation of systematic knowledge preservation through mystery schools, institutional astronomical programs, and distributed repository networks provides models for maintaining essential information through periods of civilizational disruption that may prove relevant for contemporary preservation challenges. The evidence suggests that human civilization stands not at the pinnacle of an unprecedented technological rise, but rather as the latest inheritor of knowledge systems established during earlier periods of more direct contact with advanced intelligences. Understanding this heritage and recognizing the cyclical nature of civilizational development may prove crucial for navigating current global challenges and ensuring that essential knowledge survives whatever transitions await in humanity's future. The fall of reminds us that even the greatest civilizations face moments of profound transformation, and that survival depends upon wisdom to preserve what matters most through periods of darkness toward whatever light may follow.